All right, welcome to Reinforce 2024. In this session, TDR303, we will focus on all the innovations and the continuing features that have been developed in our detection and response domain of services. My name is Himanshu Verma. I lead the team of our worldwide security specialists. We help customers and partners orchestrate native AWS security services along with partner tools. And I'm joined with
I'm Ryan Holland. I'm the General Manager for Amazon GuardDuty.
Thanks, Ryan. In this session, we will overview of AWS detection and response service portfolio. We'll cover some of the key use cases of how customers orchestrate and use these services, and also the new features that have been introduced since last year with ongoing innovation that's happening in these services. There was actually a key launch that was announced in the keynote as well. You'll hear some of that as well. And then fair warning, there are actually demonstrations of these new features included in this session as well. So with that, let's dive into this session. Our detection and response services are focused on helping customers unlock business outcomes when it comes to protecting their workloads, where we've improved our detection services with continuous protection plans, scaling their coverage across multiple different AWS workloads. Centralized monitoring, which is something which is very important for security teams to be able to monitor as well as visualize or have the ability to see events as they come in. And for security operations team to dive deeper into investigative use cases where we are helping customers correlate a lot of these findings from our detection services. And then finally, to unlock security outcomes and innovations across not just AWS workloads, but also hybrid environments or non-AWS environments. We will touch on how some of these services now are helping customers aggregate information, not only from AWS log sources, but across from all of their IT infrastructure. When we look at the detection and response services in AWS, there are three key pillars where most of our services fall in. These are building blocks that help customer orchestrate threat detection and workload protection. This is primarily the pillar where you will see we're helping customers defend against threats or ongoing threats. As we launch new workloads within AWS, for example, workloads that are enabling generative AI or workloads that are enabling customers to build Gen AI applications, these services continue to also protect against some of the threats in those areas. Additionally, the second pillar is around vulnerability management. This is an area where we've been continuously improving the experience that we can provide to not only the security personas, but also the developer personas at the customer so that they can start building these applications from scratch the right way and security is embedded into that developer experience. We also classify these vulnerabilities not only for software vulnerabilities or operating system vulnerabilities, but also across data sensitivity issues or data classification, as well as vulnerabilities associated with misconfigurations or control and posture assessments within AWS workloads as well. And then finally, risk management is an area where also customers seek help. This is associating all of the findings and or threats and correlating them to a risk score and or prioritizing them based on risk. So some of our services that are focused on centralized monitoring are also helping customers associate those risks, evaluate those risks, and take actions for response and remediation. So when we look at our portfolio of services in our detection and response domain, most typically this is how customers will orchestrate these services. First and foremost, all these services are natively integrated with AWS workloads. That means there is very little to no operationalization required, and in a matter of few clicks, customers can enable these services, and they do not require any additional log ingestion or telemetry. All these services are automatically built into the AWS workload telemetry that they ingest automatically without customers having to go in, either enable logs or incur costs associated with operationalization or infrastructure associated with that. Typically, this is an area where customers really appreciate the ease of use and also addresses the total cost of ownership that comes in bringing all that information into these services. Once these services collect that telemetry, there are three key detection services. First and foremost is Amazon Guard Duty, which is our primary threat detection service that ingests events and also correlates them, provides them through a managed threat intelligence engine as well as machine learning models, and then provides findings based on known threats or suspicious or malicious activity. The second key service is Amazon Macie that provides customers risk associated with sensitive data or data which is either including private information or PII information or PHI, healthcare information, etc. Macie has tons of classifiers that are built into the service itself, which we call managed classifiers, or gives the customers the ability to define their own custom identifiers, and based on that provides a risk assessment within Amazon S3 storage buckets of how and where the sensitive data is. The third service is Amazon Inspector, which is tied to vulnerability management and identifying vulnerabilities in code, in instances, in container registries and repositories, as well as Lambda code functions and Lambda standard scanning. Inspector over the last few years has made it absolutely easy for customers to identify these vulnerabilities and based on that report findings. All these services report findings which customers often aggregate in Security Hub. Security Hub is our centralized monitoring as well as cloud security posture assessment service. There are two key functions that Security Hub serves. One is evaluating controls as your AWS environments and workloads are growing, and as new workloads are emerging, Security Hub makes sure or ensures that it provides customers visibility into whether you're following the right security best practices or adhering to standards, which is a group of these controls, and then what are some of the deviations from those standards or best practices. Security Hub also aggregates findings from all of the native AWS security services and then provides one place for customers to then automate response and remediation actions by either invoking custom CloudWatch functions or running runbooks and playbooks to take collective actions. Over the course of last year, we've also enhanced two of our services dedicated towards risk management. And this is Amazon Detective, which collects all the findings from Security Hub, including Guard Duty, and correlates them with the raw log information from CloudTrail, Flowlog, etc., and then builds a behavioral graph. That provides security operations teams to dive deeper into investigative and root cause analysis for why a security incident is happening or how is it manifesting across their broader AWS infrastructure. And finally, to aggregate all the log information that security teams need and bring it all in a centralized, aggregated fashion and normalize that information into a standard schema is Amazon Security Lake. So that helps customers to aggregate all the log information, and from there, it can be routed to either their analytics tools or they can build their own analytics on top of that. So that's a quick overview of how these services have emerged over the period of time and how they can be orchestrated in the customer's environments. Over the period of time, we've also been making it easier for our customers to deploy these services at scale. We understand that as customers leverage AWS accounts, AWS resources, this can become pretty tedious to make sure that they have the right scale to cover all of the use cases. So when it comes to centralized management and deployment, we've actually made sure that all of these services are natively integrated with AWS organizations. As all of these services work under the logical construct of an AWS account, and they're all account-based services, we've made sure that all of these services not only can be deployed using AWS organizations, but also allow customers to have a delegated centralized management account, which is where also you can aggregate all the findings. So with that, let me show you a quick demonstration of how we've helped customers, especially in Security Hub when it comes to centralized management. So as I mentioned, we've actually done this across all of our detection and response services, but this is an example of Security Hub where I'm actually in the configuration section. And over last year, we've introduced this new feature where you can now deploy configuration policies across an organization. So in this organization view, you can see that Security Hub automatically brings in the full OU as well as AWS org structure. From here, I can easily choose not only where I want to enable Security Hub as a delegated management administrator, but also within an OU, which accounts do I want to enable certain controls, certain standard checks, or control policies as well. So from here, I can either choose the complete organization, or I can choose standard OUs, and accordingly then deploy policies or create a policy template for that particular account and or organization unit. This makes it easier for customers to then aggregate that information from a centralized management account, delegate that management, and have a centralized view as well. All of our services also include a usage tab in this detection and response domain. Most oftentimes, customers ask us that, can they try out these new features and or estimate or figure out how much it's going to cost them. This is an easy way to look at the usage for a particular service from that delegated management account, and also predict easily based on the usage what the pricing of that service will be. So this is another area where we made sure that this is consistent across all of our detection and response services. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to walk us through the threat detection and workload protection section.
Thank you, Himanshu. So as Himanshu was mentioning, GuardDuty is our primary threat detection service. And when we first launched it, we had what we call now our foundational data sources. And these include VPC flow logs, DNS query logs, and CloudTrail logs. Over the years, we've extended that by adding additional data sources, and I'll go through those in a minute. But one of the areas I wanted to talk about in the area of innovation, it sometimes is not super obvious to customers, is all the extra innovation and work that we're doing in the security analytics space. So when it comes to detecting and finding unusual or malicious activity within the different data sources, we apply multiple different tools in order to identify them. So we have a whole bunch of machine learning and AI algorithms that look at these data sources to identify unusual behavior or behavior that's sufficiently abnormal from what we previously observed or expect to see from that user or that account. We also have threat intelligence that we apply, and we partner with CrowdStrike and Proofpoint for third-party threat intelligence, but we also have started adding more and more of our own threat intelligence as well. And so we partner very closely with our perimeter protection team who run the MadPot honeypots across the globe. And that gives us a great source of active malicious known IPs and domains that we're seeing interface with those honeypots. We also run a very large graph database of all DNS requests that we have visibility to, which is quite immense, that allows us to predict and build reputations on domains. And often we're identifying malicious domains or compromised domains through this method well before they're available on third-party threat feeds. Once we identify that something is either unusual or malicious, we generate a finding. And the security findings, we add a lot of context to them, like tags or VPC information, other things that'll help make it easier to take action on those findings. We also have the option for doing an automated malware scan of the EC2 instances, EBS volumes, for findings that are related to EC2 instances. And then all of these findings go out to Security Hub, where they can be aggregated amongst other third-party tools and other security services in AWS. You can go to Amazon Detective to do an investigation on those findings. And then we send them out EventBridge, where you can then process them on your own workflows through tools like Lambda, or sending them to one of our many APN partner tools as well. So the different workload expansions that I want to talk about over the years that we've added to GuardDuty. So the first one that we launched was S3 protection. And this looks at the data plane events within your S3 estate, looking at like get, list, put, and delete calls to baseline and build a profile of what is normal, not just for a user or an account, but also for an individual bucket. And then we can flag anomalous behavior that could be indicative of a data exfiltration attack or a ransomware attack against that particular S3 bucket. We also added EKS audit log protection, and this gets all of the audit logs from EKS clusters, and we are able to then identify unusual activity in there, whether or not it's creating new role bindings or if it's a privileged container that's being launched that we haven't seen previously within that account. And then malware protection, as I mentioned, we have the ability to scan your EBS volumes for malware. And again, this can happen in response to activity that we observed from that instance, but you can also do it on demand as well. And then we'll also talk a little bit more in a couple slides around the new S3 malware protection that we just launched. Last year, we launched the RDS protection that looks at the login events for your MySQL and Postgres Aurora databases. I don't know if in case you missed it last week, we also added support for RDS Postgres as well. So in addition to the Aurora Postgres and Aurora MySQL. We also have Lambda protection, which gives us network visibility for the network connections from your Lambda functions. So looking for outbound communication from a Lambda function to a mining pool or a C2, for example. And then the biggest kind of expansion and change that we made across the service was really in going into the runtime monitoring section. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper on the runtime monitoring. We went GA on for EC2 at the end of March this year, and that added to the EKS runtime and EC2 runtime that we had launched last year as well. And the idea behind getting the runtime protection was it gets us closer to the host, and it gives us deeper visibility into the activity that's going on, and it allows us to build a wide array of new detection types. So with this additional visibility, though, often with agents comes some challenges. And so when we designed this, we wanted to do so in a way that gave us that extra visibility, but tried to address some of the common operational challenges that come along with agent solutions. So one of the biggest challenges with agents is how do I get those deployed? How do I manage the life cycle of those agents? How do I keep the rules and up to date for those agents? And so we tried to remove all of that heavy lifting by automating the deployment and management life cycle of those agents. If you're using EKS, we leverage the EKS managed add-on, and we have an integration with EKS on the back end. So as a new cluster is created, we'll automatically go and deploy the managed add-on. When there's an update available, we can deploy that for you as well. Similarly for EC2, we worked with Systems Manager to automate the deployment of our agent to the EC2 instances. And for Fargate, we have an integration on the back end that I'll show you later in the demo that will automatically inject a sidecar into a Fargate task without requiring your builders to make any changes to their task definitions. So the second big challenge that we wanted to address was resource utilization. And one of the things that we looked at was instead of doing all of the rule processing on the customer's instance, we leveraged the agent that uses eBPF to capture kernel syscalls and to send them to us over a VPC endpoint where we do all of the processing on our back end. So this keeps the amount of CPU and memory that's required for these agents to a very small amount. So now that we have support across all of the different container capabilities, ECS, EKS, Fargate, as well as now EC2, we have agent protection all the way down to the process level events. But we also still have the node level events for ECS and EKS and EC2. So if there's ever any issue with an agent, or if there's a host that you didn't want to install an agent, we still have the ability to track the activity of those instances using the traditional flow logs and DNS query logs. One of the other key benefits of us moving that heavy computational workload of doing the rule processing to our backend is it allows us to build more complex and difficult to implement detections. So with the launch of EC2 in March, we also added the ability for us to have detections that are based on command line activity. So we're looking at what is the command line process, what is actually being downloaded, for example, from a curl or a wget command. And we're also able to look at that over time. So instead of having to have rules that are matched on single events from the kernel or single events that we see from the command line, but to look over time and evaluate whether or not that event, which may not be necessarily malicious by itself, but combined with other previously observed activity, might be something that is highly suspicious or malicious. And again, as we develop all these new detections, there's no need for you to update anything on your side because all of these are on our back end. So as we make new changes or new findings, all of these are applied to all customers all at once. So again, having the VPC flow logs also is a good defense in depth strategy. So when you have the agent now, we cover all of the major compute options within AWS from EC2 to ECS to EKS. And we still have the flow logs as a defense in depth. So I wanted to then focus on, in case you missed the keynote yesterday, we launched the malware protection for S3. This extends the malware protection that we have for EBS volumes to S3 buckets. And one of the primary use cases for this was having applications where you're accepting untrusted content, maybe from the internet where you have a form to upload data to your application, or maybe you have partners that are sending you data. And you want to scan all of that content before you ingest it into your data pipeline. So we give you the option to have us tag all of the objects that we scan as either no threats found or threats detected, which means you can then build policies that prevent your applications or your users from inadvertently accessing data that either hasn't been scanned yet or which has been found to be malicious. And this is fully managed. There's no additional compute to set up. There's no workflow for you to configure. Everything happens automatically when you enable the S3 malware protection on a bucket. We'll take care of everything else from getting the object notifications and getting the object scanned and then sending the results. And we'll show you how that gets set up here in the demo as well. So just kind of pictorially how this looks. Again, one of the major use cases we've seen for this is having a web application that accepts contents from the people on the internet or maybe from partners. So as content's coming in, it lands in your bucket. As soon as the object is uploaded, we'll get notified and we'll go pick the object up and run it through a scan. And then we will tag it with the result of that scan if you enable that option. And again, this means you can then build tag-based access control policies on your bucket to prevent your applications from inadvertently accessing malicious content. So a couple of things I want to just give a quick demo of. So the first thing that I was discussing was the runtime protection. And I wanted to show how easy it is for a builder to get the security of the runtime protection. If I want to go just create a new task, and the task that I have here is a very simple Fargate task. It doesn't have anything in it except for a crypto miner. But it doesn't have any configuration about having runtime security or guard duty. So as soon as I launch this new task, if you go and look at the task details, what you'll notice is we've injected a container for the AWS guard duty agent, and this happens automatically. So again, there was no configuration change that I had to make in order to ask for that. Because the security admin for this account has enabled this feature and said, I want this on our Fargate tasks, all of this is done automatically for the users. And then when the findings come through, what you'll be able to see is you'll get a lot of rich context about the ECS cluster itself, what resources, the details on the task where we identified that, which container contained the threat, as well as the process details. So the SHA-256 hash of the process, its parent processes, its full lineage, and then where that executable was from a path perspective. So this gives you all of the data that you would need to go and address and remediate and solve this threat. So the second one I wanted to show you, I have a bucket that I did set up here. It's empty presently. And just to show you how the new malware protection for S3, you can add individual buckets or prefixes within a bucket. So you don't have to do the entire bucket, but it's very simple. You just first tell us if you want us to do the whole bucket or just individual prefixes. Again, you have the option of tagging with the results. I'll show you how this can work in a workflow. And then you provide us a role to access that content. So I'm going to upload 2 files to my bucket. The first one is iCar, which is a standard, industry standard test file for malware. And the second one is just a very clean text file that has nothing in it. So as you can see, I now have these 2 objects here. If I go and look at my clean file, we will see that it gets tagged with no threats found. Well, it will. And then on the iCar one, it will get tagged with the threats detected. So threats are found. And then what you'll notice is if I try to open this or download this object, I'll be prevented from doing so. And that's because I put a policy on this bucket that says you're only allowed to access objects that have been scanned and marked as no threats found. So again, this allows me to make it so my data access, my applications or users can access the objects that have malware in them. So the next service we want to talk about is vulnerability management. And so specifically looking at software vulnerabilities, which is commonly known as CVEs. And for that, we have Amazon Inspector. And this provides continuous assessment for vulnerabilities across both your instances, as well as your container workloads, your ECR repos, and also now Lambda functions as well. And we add to looking for CVEs, we also look at network exposure, which is really important when you're trying to gauge the risk level of a particular vulnerability. Most customers have more vulnerabilities in their environments than they can go and address at any given moment, so you really need to prioritize. And by understanding the reachability of a particular resource, that really helps the security teams understand what are their more pressing vulnerabilities to address. And again, like our other services, fully frictionless enablement with one click, and you can deploy it across all of your accounts within your organization. And we provide a contextualized risk score, and we look at things like that reachability, the underlying CVSS score, as well as whether or not we see active exploits going on against that particular vulnerability to help give you, again, the priority that you should go and address this risk. So there's several features that we've added on beyond just simple going and scanning for vulnerabilities. One of the first ones that we launched last year was the software bill of materials. So this gives you a way of exporting and having understanding across your entire account structure, what are the different pieces of software and packages that you have. And there's a lot of, another good use case for the software bill of materials is a recently launched feature called CI/CD image scanning plugin. And this is really powerful because it allows us to shift vulnerability detection further left and detect vulnerabilities in the build stage. Rather than deploying them to your production and then scanning them, we can scan based off the SBOM that comes out of the inspector and look at what is the software that's in there, what are the versions, and then analyze whether or not there are any current known vulnerabilities in any of those packages. And then you can build a workflow that can block the build or notify the developer to get those vulnerabilities addressed before they go and push that to production. And then going forward, all of those repos are continuously scanned. So this augments the ongoing continuous scanning that takes place as well. For EC2 instances, if you're using Systems Manager, we do the automated continuous vulnerability assessment using that. But we also now have the option for customers who don't want to run any software agents to do an agentless scan as well. And again, this is a continuous process that allows us to always be able to give you the most up-to-date picture of your software vulnerabilities. And as more and more customers use Lambda within their applications, we've added the ability to scan your Lambda functions as well. And for Lambda, we're looking at the packages that you're importing that are present in the different layers that you're using. But we also can analyze the source code itself. So, there's vulnerabilities that might be in some of the packages you import, but if a developer writes code that does something insecurely, we can flag that as a potential weakness. And not only that, we'll use generative AI through Code Whisper to generate a snippet of code and a downloadable patch that will not only tell you what was the problem, but actually give you a fix for it as well. We also just recently launched on-demand CIS scans for EC2 instances as well. So these are the CIS host level scans that look at the benchmarks of how you've configured the operating system itself. And then ECR image scanning, so for private repos, again, continuous scanning of all of the container images that you're storing in your ECR repo. I'll just do a quick walkthrough of the inspector console. So when it comes to inspector, the first thing you're going to see is we're displaying a summary of where your coverage is. So what are the instances and the container repos that you have being monitored? Top level 2, what are your more critical findings? And then these risk-based remediations. These are the number of vulnerabilities and that impact the most resources. So where do you get the most bang for your buck of doing a remediation? So I just want to show quickly that Lambda code scanning that I was discussing. So in this case, I have a Lambda function that's a Python function, and I'm using insecure cryptology. And so what we found is, we'll show you the exact code snippet, where in the line of code is the problem, give you a description of what that problem, why we're calling this a problem, as well as a downloadable patch and a screenshot showing you exactly what are the recommended changes to your code that would remediate this particular vulnerability. And with that, I'll hand it over to
So moving on, we also have a service that allows customers to centrally now aggregate all the findings, and that's Security Hub. But one of the key functions that Security Hub offers is it does control evaluations based on configurations as accounts, as workloads are getting added or new workloads are getting launched in your AWS accounts. So Security Hub provides customers the ability to evaluate these controls continuously on an ongoing fashion and then provide findings which are essentially deviations from standard best practices. Some of the standards that are now built in are AWS's security best practices, NIST, CIS benchmarks, PCI DSS, and most lately we've actually upgraded the CIS benchmark versions to the latest version as well. This is another advantage that Security Hub provides, is that customers don't have to go in and continuously update the controls or change the definitions based on new versions. That's something that the service does automatically in the form of a managed fashion. Also, Security Hub brings findings from services like GuardDuty, Inspector, Macy, and all other native AWS security services that provide findings and then aggregate them all in Security Hub. So that becomes a centralized place where customers can actually integrate not only findings from AWS native tools, but also partner tools and services as well. So Security Hub does have the ability to bring in findings from partner integrated tools as well. Once those findings are there, including the control evaluation and the security deviation findings, then customers can act on these findings by taking remediated response actions. So these could be either defining custom CloudWatch actions or deploying runbooks that can address these. Typical example of this would be where you are seeing a finding that has been originated from GuardDuty demonstrating RDP brute force. Similarly, that same instance will probably also have a finding from Inspector that brute force has now been exploited and there's potential vulnerabilities that are there on that instance, which is how that led to that RDP brute force. You can then go into and look up that instance ID in Security Hub and see if there's possible misconfigurations, whether there was either a port that was left open or the security group policies were relaxed as it comes to control evaluations. And with that information, then customers can actually deploy response actions to fix those either misconfigurations or address those vulnerabilities or patch certain vulnerabilities from within Security Hub. So Security Hub's response and remediation comes in various different flexible options as well. The first one is that it allows customers to enable automated remediation for high severity configuration findings. This is something that you can do by deploying already available solutions such as the AWS incident response solution or detection and response solution that is available as a runbook. Customers can also define their own custom CloudWatch actions to invoke these runbooks. We also have partner integrations where built-in integrations with tools like Jira or ServiceNow that you can actually easily define workflows of what should happen within that finding and where should it get routed to the appropriate application or business teams, and integrated workflows that you can leverage to then define what actions need to be taken. One of the new features that we introduced in Security Hub was based on customers' feedback that they wanted one central place to deploy that configuration. I showed you earlier while demonstrating the AWS organization integration that not only Security Hub can be enabled and delegated management from a centralized account, but you can also now deploy central configurations across multiple accounts or per account and organization unit or across the full organization. This now allows customers to then choose if they want to have individual configurations or separate configurations for development accounts versus prod accounts, and then have a single pane of glass for your organization's security configuration. Another associated feature to that is allowing customers the flexibility to also customize controls. We often heard from customers that in particular standards or control standards, when we had originally made them available in Security Hub, the conditions such as ports, parameters, etc. were all fixed. But in certain environments, we recognize that customers have changed those based on their needs. So they wanted to define and or edit those policies before they are deployed or evaluated. So that option is now available to customize these controls and then on an ongoing basis evaluate them based on the definitions as they are customized. And this is again something that can be deployed from that centralized configuration policy either across an account or an organization unit or across multiple regions using AWS organization or region rollup. So let's take a look at a quick demonstration of this particular feature. So when you look at Security Hub now, there is this option available or a wizard that helps you centrally manage these configurations. You can choose the configuration type and then also choose at the custom policy, look at the standards that you want to include, and then you can go in there and choose a particular control. And then here in this case, I'm choosing the EC2 -18 control, which is related to security groups, and you can see that we've now provided options to either list and or edit the ports that are there. The default ports here are port 80 and 443, but this is something that customers can customize to whatever their need is, and then this becomes a customized control. The findings that are reported from this will also show up as a customized control, and I can choose which account and or centralized organization or OUs I want to apply this. So this is now available as a wizard that you can apply within the service. Moving on to risk management, which helps and enables customers to investigate issues, identify key risks, and also aggregate all the data that's needed for security analytics. The first key enhancement here is related to Amazon Detective. Amazon Detective is a service that aggregates a lot of the underlying telemetry and information that security analysts need to be able to dive deeper into security issues. Typically, we provide findings with a lot of enriched information, and that finding includes instance IDs or resource tags or resource information or AWS resource names, which can be used by customers to then identify where to go fix an issue. But security analysts also want to go deeper into the raw log information and oftentimes identify how a particular threat is traversing within the organization, or where does that threat fall in the broader attack surface, such as like a framework, like a MITRE attack framework, etc. Whether it's a discovery threat or a reconnaissance threat, and where in the threat lifecycle that falls in. Detective uses machine learning language and then creates a baseline over a period of time to also look at API activity that's happening both in CloudTrail and flow logs, and then alerts or provides customers anytime we see deviations from that baseline as well, or spikes in API as well as network usage, which customers can then go in and drill down deeper into. Over the period of time, we've now provided graph visualization, which is the underlying technology that Detective uses to correlate all the events and link them together wherever there are common entities. These entities and nodes are something that customers can choose and then start traversing the path of a certain defect or a certain finding. Now you can imagine that as you're getting too many findings from Guard Duty, from Security Hub, from Inspector, all in Detective, these findings can be associated to either a single resource or multiple resources. So over a period of time now, we've added finding groups in Detective. What finding groups does is provides customers a place to actually go in and look at multiple findings that might be common to a particular resource. For example, an instance is having, in my earlier example, either a threat like RDP brute force, a vulnerability from Inspector, and misconfigurations reported by Security Hub. All of this will be correlated with that instance in the middle, and then you'll be able to see that graph visualization within that finding group as well. So to show you a quick demonstration of also a new feature that has been added that leverages generative AI, here you can see that I am in Detective's finding groups, and I've chose a finding group that shows me multiple different findings associated from Guard Duty, which is associated to this particular IP addresses and subnets. And also, since these are multiple findings, for the security team to be able to easily decipher what is a quick summary of this finding, using generative AI now, Detective provides a quick finding summary of exactly what's going on in that finding group. So you can see here that there's a compromised EC2 instance with exfiltration data and communicating with malicious domains. That's an easy inference for now the security analysts to actually go ahead and prioritize and address this issue rather than actually going in and doing their own analysis and trying to derive that inference. So this particular summary is using generative AI behind the scenes and then providing that summary in Detective. Moving on, this is one of our latest services in this domain, and it's Amazon Security Lake. We heard from customers that they needed an easy way to aggregate all the log information that's needed for security analysis or for sending it to their analytics tools without the heavy lifting or without the management of infrastructure that goes into either one, ingestion, second, storage, and third, transformation. As you can imagine, we wanted to provide customers a solution that not only brings log sources from AWS services, but also from their other overall infrastructure. This could include SaaS applications, or even applications that might be currently on-premise or in hybrid environments, or other cloud providers as well. Also, we heard from customers that they needed an easy way to transform all this information into a standard schema. Because for the security teams, it becomes pretty tedious downstream if they are dealing with multiple different proprietary formats. Like for example, if you're looking for an IP address in VPC flow logs or CloudTrail that has a different schema and format versus looking for that same IP address in your firewall logs. So Security Lake, just in a matter of few clicks, without actually enabling any log sources, first and foremost, automatically integrated with AWS log sources, brings in those AWS logs into the service by creating a centralized S3 lake formation bucket in your account itself. Secondly, it optimizes and normalizes all the data that it's gathering into standard Parquet objects, as well as into open cybersecurity schema framework. And then, once the data is all there, it provides customers the flexibility to decide what they want to do with that. Do you want to like send it now to your downstream analytics source tools, or you want to build your own analytics on top of that? Most importantly, it provides customers control over their own security data. Because oftentimes what we were seeing is that as this data was getting streamed off to other tools, customers were not able to either enrich that data themselves anymore, or they had to do further orchestration to bring that data back in so that they can either apply generative AI or other type of analytics on top of that data. So now with Security Lake, since this is all integrated with AWS organization as well as the multi-region construct, it provides customers the ability to centralize all of that security data, define the region roll-ups per regional requirements, and then aggregate all that data in your own S3 lake formation buckets. Customers do not have to worry about any of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that goes in because all the infrastructure elements are taken care of automatically by the service behind the scenes. More importantly, it provides now customers the flexibility to also do lifecycle management on that data. For example, tiering, how much data needs to be in cold storage versus hot storage, and the service also prepares all that data by virtually indexing and queuing it so that all the tables and the schemas are organized, and all the security team has to do is now run simple SQL queries to derive outputs by even using Amazon Athena, for example. As soon as the service is actually enabled and set up, you can right away go to your Athena account and you can see all the tables that are set up. This is again fully automated, which earlier typically customers would have to run either glue tables or lambdas and step functions and transform all that data and organize it themselves. But now this is all done automatically. There are two constructs in the service. One is what we call data sources. So this is where information comes into the lake. As I mentioned, we natively integrate with AWS sources, and over the last few months, we've actually added additional sources from AWS logs, such as AWS WAF logs and EKS logs. So there are over 10 AWS log sources that are now integrated with the service. In addition to that, we also support findings from Security Hub that also come in along with those log sources. Again, there is no additional ingress required or ingestion required for this. You don't have to go in and enable any of these log sources. Once you enable Security Hub and you choose by account and by log source what logs you want to enable, it'll automatically bring in that information without having customers incur ingestion costs. Secondly, we have several partner integrations who have taken on the open source community of Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework and are now essentially building their logs in that format. So using those partner integrations, you can easily add additional sources and then bring logs from those partners as well. This is just a sample set of all the SaaS applications and the partners we have, but additionally, you can bring in logs from endpoints, from even your endpoint devices, or from your productivity apps, and or other cloud providers as well. Once the data is all in the lake and it's standardized and normalized, then we have a set of partners which are what we call subscribers. You want to decide now what you want to do with the data, how you want to manage the life cycle of the data, and which analytics tools do you want to use that. The full flexibility is available to our customers now. First and foremost, you can use AWS analytics tools like Athena, OpenSearch, and you can apply artificial intelligence and machine learning or GenAI applications or GenAI workloads on top, like using Amazon Bedrock or SageMaker. And we are seeing use cases where customers are building their own chatbots for incident response, or they've built applications, GenAI applications to ease the security operations process by leveraging Bedrock as well as SageMaker on top of that data. Additionally, Security Lake provides two different accesses to that data. One is what we call direct access, where you can stream S3 objects to analytics tools, or data in place query access. As I mentioned, the service itself prepares the data and also virtually indexes and queues the data. So you can actually use an analytic tool that supports that federated query search and just query the data from where it is, and hence preventing egress costs as well. This is an area where some of our partners in the security incident event management space, or SIM space, have actually started building those features. And in the keynote you heard yesterday that one of our primary SIM partners, Splunk, has also been preparing to launch that feature at their conference later this week. So this is an example of how customers can leverage now analytics tools to act on that data. With that, just to close out, all of these services and the three pillars that I mentioned, which is threat detection, vulnerability management, and risk management, these are the suite of AWS services that are focused on helping customers continually detect, respond, and protect their AWS workloads. As new and new workloads come on, we've been adding additional protection plans within our services and scaling their scope. This helps security teams to enhance and streamline and centralize all of their security visibility in one place. And then these detection and response services are seamlessly integrated with our workloads, eliminating all undifferentiated heavy lifting that goes in either in the management or the initial setup or ongoing maintenance of these services. So with that, thanks for joining.